Rebecca Dawson had spent the past 7 years as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. Though long hours and short staffing had chipped away at her energy, she never lost the quiet flame that drew her to nursing in the first place. Rebecca believed deeply in healing and compassion. That was why, one rainy afternoon, she found herself sitting beside an elderly man with silver hair and trembling hands, fighting back the urge to cry as he grasped her hand in desperation. Mr. Salazar, the elderly patient in front of her, had been coming to St. Mary's for months, battling a heart condition that had grown worse over time. Though he had family, most of them lived far away, leaving him to rely on distant friends and his dwindling savings to cover mounting medical expenses. And now he needed surgery, an operation the doctors had warned was essential if he wanted a chance to survive. But the procedure was costly, and his insurance wouldn't cover it. Each time he reached for a solution, another door slammed shut. "I don't know what else to do," Nurse Dawson, Mr. Salazar whispered, his voice barely audible over the steady hum of machines and the murmur of hospital staff in the hallway. I've tried everything." His eyes held years of life, struggle, and strength, but now they looked hollow, defeated. It wasn't the kind of look Rebecca could easily forget. Rebecca swallowed, feeling the burden of his words settle over her like a weight she couldn't ignore. She'd seen patients in similar situations, but something about Mr. Salazar stirred her deeply. Maybe it was the way he reminded her of her own grandfather, who had been her source of stability growing up. She thought of the hospital bills piling up on her own kitchen counter, of her student loan payments that seemed to stretch endlessly before her. But she also knew that her heart wasn't about to let her sit idly by. That evening, as she drove home through the rain, her thoughts swirled. The costs of Mr. Salazar's surgery replayed in her mind like a stubborn refrain, lingering in the quiet of her car. The idea of dipping into her own savings, a modest amount she'd scrimped together over years, seemed foolish. Yet the thought of doing nothing filled her with even greater dread. By the time she pulled into her driveway, a decision had rooted itself firmly in her heart. Rebecca spent the night weighing her options, listing out her expenses on an old notepad she'd pulled from her desk drawer. Rent, groceries, insurance payments, a few $100s she set aside each month for emergencies, most of it she could manage to cut back on, at least for a while. Her savings would take a hit, but the feeling that she was meant to help was stronger than any financial hesitation. She thought of Mr. Salazar, of his hope flickering like a candle struggling against the wind, and it was decided. The next morning, Rebecca arrived at the hospital early and found Mr. Salazar's doctor. She shared her plan, her voice unsteady but resolute. Dr. Nichols, a seasoned physician with a reputation for sharp insight, looked at her in surprise, though a glimmer of admiration softened his expression. "Rebecca, are you sure about this? That's a considerable amount of money," he said, glancing at her with a rare look of compassion. "You're not obligated to do this." "I know," she replied, her voice unwavering. "But I want to. Mr. Salazar's life is worth far more than a few $1,000s." A few hours later, paperwork was filed and arrangements were made. Rebecca used nearly all her savings to cover the surgery's upfront costs, her bank account taking a hit that was both sobering and strangely exhilarating. Her heart raced with a mix of nerves and relief. She didn't know if Mr. Salazar would ever learn what she had done, but that didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, she felt deeply at peace. The surgery went smoothly. Mr. Salazar's heart condition was addressed with a precision that only modern medicine could provide, and as he recovered, his vitality slowly returned. Rebecca continued her shifts, watching him from a distance, her chest swelling with quiet pride each time she saw him walking a little further, sitting up a little straighter. He thanked her every day with the same warm smile, his eyes brightening each time he saw her, but he never knew the full truth. To him, she was just his nurse, the one who cared, the one who listened. And for Rebecca, that was more than enough. Days passed, and the familiar rhythm of the hospital returned. Rebecca returned to her routines, picking up extra shifts to make up for her drained savings. Life resumed its steady pace, until one Thursday morning everything shifted. As she prepared for her day off, Rebecca sat at her small kitchen table, ready to check her bank account. She had been meaning to go over her budget, hoping to make a careful plan to rebuild her savings. She tapped her bank's app, already anticipating the tight numbers that awaited her. But when her account balance loaded, her breath caught. It was impossible. Where there had once been a small, dwindling amount sat a figure far greater than anything she had ever seen in her life. An amount that could not be explained by her modest salary or the handful of extra hours she had picked up. The screen showed not just a few $1,000s, but an overwhelming sum, a deposit so large it took her several moments to grasp its significance. Rebecca blinked, her mind struggling to catch up. She checked the details, searching for any hint of a mistake, a technical glitch, anything that might explain what she was seeing. But the deposit was real, with a reference code that simply read for compassion beyond duty. Stunned, she stared at the screen, her heart hammering. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them quite able to explain why or how this had happened. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if this was some kind of prank, a clerical error that would soon be reversed. She decided to contact her bank, hoping they could shed light on the situation. The representative, after a lengthy pause, confirmed the deposit as legitimate. We're not at liberty to disclose details about the sender, but this appears to be an intentional deposit, a substantial one, the voice on the other end of the line explained. There's no indication that the funds will be retracted. Congratulations, Ms. Dawson. I'd recommend speaking with a financial advisor. Rebecca thanked the representative, her voice barely a whisper, her mind still in disbelief. She sat back, her thoughts a whirlpool of questions. Her phone chimed with a message from an unknown number just as she was about to put it down. She opened the message, her curiosity piqued. Dear Rebecca, I have been fortunate enough to see the kindness you showed someone very dear to me. Though you may never know the true extent of your actions, know that they have not gone unnoticed. May this allow you to continue being a light for others, just as you were for us. With the deepest gratitude, a friend. Rebecca felt the weight of the words, her eyes growing misty. She was stunned, filled with an overwhelming sense of gratitude and awe. But it wasn't just about the money, it was what it symbolized, a recognition of the value she held dear. She thought of Mr. Salazar, of his quiet strength, and a feeling of warmth washed over her. In the days that followed, Rebecca found herself reflecting on her journey as a nurse. She thought of the countless faces she had seen over the years, the lives she had helped in small ways, and the countless struggles she had witnessed. The knowledge that someone had noticed her quiet act of compassion, that her kindness had left a mark, moved her profoundly. She walked through the hospital hallways with a newfound sense of purpose, her steps lighter, her spirit lifted. But with the unexpected gift came a realization that went deeper than the money. The act of giving had transformed her more than any reward could. Rebecca understood now that every patient, every life she touched, carried a unique story, and that her role wasn't just to heal but to connect, to share in their humanity, even if only for a brief moment. She could sense that this gift would not simply be a windfall, but a chance to honor the essence of the work she had chosen. As the weeks unfolded, Rebecca pondered what she would do with this gift. Rebecca took her time to absorb the reality of her new circumstances. The astonishing sum in her account represented more than financial freedom, it felt like a tribute to the values she held closest. But even with this incredible gift, she knew in her heart that it wasn't just meant to make her life comfortable. It was a chance to deepen the compassion she'd always believed in, and expand its reach to help others in ways she'd once only dreamed about. A few days later, she visited Mr. Salazar in his recovery room. He looked healthier than she'd ever seen him, his cheeks filling out, his voice stronger. His gratitude was immense, though he had no idea what she had sacrificed to make his surgery possible. And that was how Rebecca wanted it to stay. Mr. Salazar, she said one afternoon, helping him settle into his bed. What do you think you'll do once you're home and healthy? He smiled. A distant, peaceful look in his eyes. I think I'll spend more time with my grandchildren. I missed too many birthdays when I was younger, working 2 jobs to support the family. But now, I'd like to make up for that time. Rebecca grinned, her heart warmed by his plans. She knew now that helping him live for those moments with his family was worth every dollar, every late-night worry about her own dwindling bank account. And he, like so many of her other patients, taught her about the value of life beyond the walls of the hospital. That evening, she went home with a plan starting to take shape in her mind. She didn't just want to use the money to make her own life easier, she wanted to use it in a way that would extend her reach as a nurse, even beyond her patients at St. Mary's. She wanted to create a ripple effect, something that could serve people like Mr. Salazar and the many others who walked through the hospital doors with limited means and boundless needs. Rebecca spent the next few weeks quietly reaching out to her contacts at St. Mary's, sharing her idea with trusted colleagues and hospital administrators. She wanted to establish a fund for patients in financial distress, a reserve that would cover necessary medical treatments, transportation to the hospital, and even follow-up care that many patients struggled to afford. Her colleagues were both surprised and moved by her plan. While healthcare workers often talked about the need for such resources, few had ever been able to back up their intentions with tangible support. With the generous funds Rebecca now held, this dream became possible. And as word of her idea spread, others began to join in, contributing small amounts of their own to support the fund. She named it the Hope Fund, believing that hope was what kept people fighting through the hardest days. As the fund grew, Rebecca noticed an incredible change around her. People began to donate and volunteer, doctors and nurses showed renewed energy in advocating for their patients, and families whose lives were touched by the fund reached out to express their gratitude. Patients who had once struggled to afford life-saving procedures now had a safety net, and for many it made all the difference. The story of her anonymous benefactor and the creation of the Hope Fund spread throughout the hospital and beyond. Though the mysterious donor's identity remained unknown, people came to recognize Rebecca's commitment and courage in channeling her fortune toward the betterment of others. Over time, she became known as more than just a skilled nurse. She became a source of hope, someone who inspired her colleagues and patients alike to believe in the power of compassion. One afternoon, as Rebecca was preparing to end her shift, she received an unexpected visitor, a young woman with a familiar face. It was Mr. Salazar's granddaughter, the one who had come to visit him the day he was discharged. "My grandfather told me about what you did for him, Nurse Dawson," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He doesn't know everything, but he understands that you went above and beyond to make sure he was taken care of. He wouldn't have made it without you." Rebecca smiled softly. "Your grandfather is a wonderful man. He deserves to have all the time he can with you and your family." The young woman handed her a small package, wrapped neatly in paper. "He wanted you to have this. He said it's not much, but it's a small thank you from all of us." Rebecca opened the package after her shift, finding a beautifully carved wooden heart, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. She recognized Mr. Salazar's handiwork. He had made it himself, despite his arthritis, pouring his gratitude into each careful stroke. She held it close, feeling a swell of emotion that reminded her of the joy that first brought her to nursing. It was in moments like these that she felt the full beauty of her work. Years passed, and Rebecca continued her mission, expanding the Hope Fund as donations poured in. Through her efforts, countless patients received the care they needed, and the community that had once faced so many barriers began to heal in ways they'd never thought possible. The hospital's waiting rooms were no longer filled with worried faces questioning how they would afford their next treatment, and families facing critical conditions found solace in the support of their community. As she walked through the halls of St. Mary's one evening, Rebecca paused to look out the window, her reflection gazing back at her, a reflection of a woman who had, through one act of compassion, become an anchor for so many. Her life had transformed in ways she never imagined when she first dipped into her savings for Mr. Salazar's surgery, and each time she thought of the anonymous benefactor who had made all of this possible, she felt a gratitude that words couldn't capture. It was in that quiet moment, surrounded by the bustling sounds of the hospital, that she realized something profound. While the money had been a blessing, it was the choice to give that had changed her, deepening her purpose and forging connections that would outlast any financial gain. What had begun as a single act of compassion had grown into a legacy of kindness, healing lives in ways she could have only dreamed. Rebecca held the wooden heart in her hand, its warmth familiar and grounding. And she knew, with every beat of her own heart, that this was what she was meant to do. The power of her gift lay not in wealth, but in the simple act of sharing, of creating hope in a world that often seemed dark. And as long as she had the strength to help, she would continue, knowing that one kind choice could indeed change the world.